I'm going to take you through today a question that I get asked really regularly. That question is it okay if I repeat an example throughout my interviews? So if you want the short version of this video, the answer is avoid it if you possibly can. If you want the slightly longer version, I'm going to take you through why I say that and what to do in the circumstances. I have my notes with me because I literally am struggling to access my brain at this point, so I'm really sorry if I'm looking down more than I usually would. Forgive me this time. Okay, so the reason why I say avoid it if you possibly can is your Amazon interview is an exercise in gathering evidence. Your panel and your interviewers are trying to prove or disprove a hypothesis, and that hypothesis is, are you going to raise the bar on 50% of the population in the current level that you are interviewing for? So that's what they're doing. They're gathering evidence to prove or disprove that as a hypothesis. A really good analogy, it's a bit weird, but it works. A really good analogy is if you are presenting a case at court. If you're going to court, you take along with you a whole bunch of witnesses to state their evidence to the judge, the jury, whatever it is. And the more witnesses you have presenting information in favour of whatever case it is you're trying to argue for yourself, the more compelling the case becomes, right? Less witnesses, less compelling. So your examples are your witnesses. The more you bring along, the more compelling your case. The less you bring along, the less compelling your case. So that's the first reason. Second reason is that your Amazon panel and your interviewers are looking for someone who will perform consistently at a high bar. At Amazon, that's what working at Amazon is. Every day, every week, every month, every year, you need to be performing at a high level. They're looking for evidence in the past that you're going to operate that way in their business. So if they're looking back at your career history, if you're pulling out examples that show fresh examples, unique examples that show time and time and time and time again, you've got great evidence of being a really high performer, they're going to believe that if they bring you into the business, you'll repeat the same pattern. If you have a more limited range of examples, they may be fantastic examples, but they're going to look at those and think, maybe this person has moments of brilliance, moments of glory, but that's not what we're looking for. Amazon isn't looking for moments of glory, they're looking for consistent high performers. So again, a more limited range, you risk the moments of glory concern. Okay, so that's the reason why I say it. Here's my suggestion about what to do when some of the circumstance does arise. So, in the first instance, never use exactly the same example for the same leadership principle. Now, when you are at panel, that's the final round of interviews where you're back-to-back meeting 4 to 7 different Amazonians. When you're at panel, you are never going to get the same leadership principle asked of you by the different people you're meeting in that back-to-back set. Everybody is pre-allocated a leadership principle when they go in to interview you, and they're not going to overlap, they're unique. So don't worry about it in that circumstance. But what you are very likely to face is that you will get questions from a repeat leadership principle between rounds. So maybe round 1, round 2, round 1, panel, round 2, panel. At some point, someone's very likely to ask you a question in the same leadership principle. You really need to avoid using exactly the same example. And the reason why that is really simple. The evidence is already gathered. It's captured, it's there in black and white, in code and ones and zeros for the interview panel to already see. So if you just bring that witness back to say exactly the same thing, it's not new evidence, it's a waste of a witness. Equally, it's a waste of time of your interviewer to capture exactly the same data that their predecessor has captured. I have on occasion realised that a candidate is telling me exactly the same example as they've used the last time because I've read their previous interview notes and I've stopped them and I've asked them to please give me a different example because I know they've used this one before. Now, that's not always going to happen. Your interviewer is not always going to do that for you, so don't put yourself in that position. Have at least 2 examples ready to go for each leadership principle so you don't have to repeat yourself. Okay, so that's that. Second thing then is, I did say that although you won't get exactly the same leadership principle asked time after time in panel, you could potentially get a question asked from another leadership principle that you actually think is a perfect question for an example that you've already given earlier, either at different rounds or earlier on in the day. And you feel really strongly that that's the right example for this. As I said, if you can find another strong one, I think you should. But if you feel passionately that this other example that you've used before is absolutely perfect for this example, here's how you deal with it. When you're going through your situation, task, action, result, improvement, that's the starry method that I talk about in my video of the hidden leadership principle if you don't know it. Make sure that the only thing that matches between those two expressions of your example is the situation. Once you get to task, that's it. You need to really, really heavily reshape your narrative to reflect the question that you've just been asked. If you can do that, then you'll successfully make it look like a very different set of evidence because you're going to focus deeply on the alternative leadership principle. If you can do that, you'll be okay to use the same example. There's a third situation that I've found that's common in a number of job families. Not a lot, but if you're one of these people, worth taking note of now. So there are some roles where people do only a couple of really big projects a year, 2 or 3 massive projects. And it seems like when they kind of tell the situation that it's the same example over and over. My guidance to you people, if that's you, is in your preparation, take some time to step back and deconstruct your project into different phases and think about those different phases as if they were different projects. So when you are going back to that same big project for a repeat example, what you can do is give your interviewer a 3-4-worder just explaining the macro project, but then invest the majority of your situation time detailing the individual phase of your project. So those are the kind of the 3 tips on how to deal with the situation. The final thing that I will say is, in fact, I've got 2 final things to say. Firstly, if you are going to use a repeat, I would really recommend warning your interviewer. The reason I say this is just purely from my experience as an interviewer, reading notes of other interviews and what I've heard from other interviewers when they've read notes from other interviews. When it's a surprise that a candidate has used the same example, there's something a bit niggling about it as an interviewer. If your candidate has warned you and prepared you and said, I have used this example before, but I really feel it's appropriate for this question, you go into reading the huge swathe of interview notes that you have to read before you go into debrief. You're just mentally prepared to see your example that you spent all of your time typing up, rereading, deconstructing, analysing, summarising, all of those things you have to do when you're reviewing your interview notes. If it's not a surprise that you're going to see this appearing again, there's just something different about how you respond to seeing that information repeated in somebody else's notes. The last thing then that I wanted to say is, yes, it is okay to repeat examples, but I think I've said this in previous videos, you should really try not to repeat too many. For all of the reasons that I explained at the beginning of this video, if you repeat too many examples, it really, really does start to reduce the pool of evidence and raise questions as to whether you have that consistent high performance. Really, if you're interviewing, and this is broad guidance here, right? There's no rule about this, but my experience is, if you're interviewing, say, for a L5 level, relatively junior, a couple of repeats, okay. I wouldn't personally be overly concerned as a bar raiser about that. If you're interviewing for an L6 role, really, if you're repeating your story more than once, I'm starting to get a little bit concerned whether you actually do have that consistency and breadth that the Amazon is looking for. So more junior, you've got less experience, you've got less kind of evidence years behind you to pull from, I'll be more forgiving. The more senior you get, guys, the less forgiving that your interview panel is going to be about repetition, because you've been around long enough. If you're a high enough performer, you should have enough examples to not have to repeat. Okay, so I made it through. I might even try doing another video, we'll see. Thank you very much. Comments would be lovely. I love hearing from you guys, so put some notes in the comments please. Tell me who you are, tell me where you're from, tell me what role you're interviewing for. Love to hear from you. I hope that was helpful, and I'll see you next time.